This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And this is Creep Street. Real quick up top, of course, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod. On our Facebook page, there is another page called Citizens of the Milky Way. It's a little forum where we like to daily interact with our listeners. We post funny memes, tell spooky stories, or we'll, post cool articles, stuff like that. Everyone is welcome to join that. It's within our Facebook page. Find Citizens of the Milky Way. Click on it. One of us will let you in. Everyone is welcome.
That's right.
And of course, if once a week is not enough, and let's face it, it is not.
It's just not. It's literally not enough.
This podcast is habit forming, okay?
Yeah.
You can't quit it if you get on it, baby.
But it's good. The good news is you can listen while pregnant.
Absolutely. In fact, it's encouraged.
Yes, but habit forming.
For that baby, too.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to come out a creep.
You're going to have creeps for generations, baby.
That's right. Go to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast to get all sorts of goodies. There's different tiers. And of course, at the end of the show, we will read off the names of our top tier Patreon subscribers.
That's right. Of course we will.
But now it's time for Dylan to shut the f*** up.
Oh my God, Dylan. Citizens of the Milky Way, get ready for Doppelgängers. Whoa.
Oh my God.
We're very excited for this episode.
This is one that people are excited about.
Yes, doppelgangers. I feel like so many people have heard the word. We know, a little bit about it, but I think it's worth going into a little bit of a deeper dive.
Absolutely, because it's freaky stuff. And there's incredible instances of it that apparently happen throughout history to well-known historical figures.
Right, and we're going to talk about some of them here in a minute. And it's a fascinating topic.
Absolutely.
And I'm really excited to hear what you all think about it.
Right.
So please let us know via social media, via email, creepstreetpodcast@gmail.com. Let us know what you think about this episode and if you have any theories or ideas or what have you as to what this phenomenon really is. So we had some great sources this week, and here are our main sources. A YouTube video called "Does Someone Else Have Your Face? Doppelgangers Explained" from the It's Okay to Be Smart page by PBS.
All right.
Then we have another YouTube video called "Have You Seen Your Doppelganger? Real Doppelganger Stories" from the Something Scary /Snarled page.
Oh.
Then we have The Lore Explained, the Doppelganger from Top 5 Scary Videos. We also have Doppelgangers in the Strange Case of Emilie Sagee from Bedtime Stories.
Oh my goodness.
And we also have just a good old classic frickin' book called Footfalls on the Boundary of Another World by Robert Dale Owen.
Wonderful.
Now, a doppelganger, as I'm sure many people could guess, it is originally a German word, comes from a German word meaning double walker or double goer.
I mean, it makes sense.
You know,
what else are you going to call it?
Sounds like. Just that term, the double walker or double goer, doesn't fully encapsulate what being a doppelganger is.
Right.
These days, the word doppelganger is kind of used as like a twin stranger or something like that.
Right. It's very loosely used nowadays.
Yes.
Like if you see someone who kind of looks like you, it's kind of an off-the-cuff remark. You go, oh, there's your doppelganger.
Exactly. Or like, oh, Katy Perry's doppelganger is Zooey Deschanel or something like that.
Right, exactly. Yeah, they look alike, but obviously that's not what it really
That's
means.
not what doppelganger truly means. That's more of like a dead ringer or a twin stranger is what that kind of is when you see that. But whereas a doppelganger has more of a spooky tone to it.
Yeah.
It really is more so, it means a ghostly duplicate of a living being, and it often is an omen of death.
Yikes.
The first written occurrence of the word was in 1796 in a German book called Siebenkass. But the idea of doppelgangers has gone back for years and years and years, all the way back to ancient civilizations.
Right.
So for anyone out there that or knows a lot about ancient cultures and ancient civilizations, feel free to reach out to us and give us some more information.
Absolutely.
About this, because I would love to get some more information on that. And I'm not an expert on ancient civilizations in any way, but in ancient Egypt, as far as my research was showing me, they had an idea that the human soul was split up into multiple parts.
Interesting.
That there's like your soul, there is an aspect of your soul that you could kind of meet that looks just like you. And kind of similar aspects come forward in Norse mythology and Finnish mythology. And that's kind of where maybe a little bit of the like omen or premonition towards death or towards some sort of negative occurrence kind of starts to come up. And then it's also was very prominent in Cornish, Welsh, and Norman folklore, as well as Celtic folklore and Irish folklore. Whereas in Britain, I believe they had this idea of something called an anku, I believe is how you say it, where it was like, it was the last person that died within a parish of that year would be the anku for the next year.
That is very cool.
Yes.
It's something I'm unfamiliar with.
Yes, and I don't believe it's, the whole dang island.
Right,
but,
exactly.
And
right,
maybe
right.
in some spots.
Elements of it, right.
Right. So yeah, this person would be kind of for the whole next year, the person who was the last to die in the parish, for the whole next year would be kind of the person that would bring the people that died in the next year onto the other side. So it was like kind of a year-long fucking task.
It's kind of like not it. Last one to die, you got to be the escort next year.
God. And then you're like, oh my God, a whole year of work. This kind of sucks.
You're right.
In my personal opinion. Maybe it was a cool thing. I don't know. But in my opinion, I'm like, can I just go? Can I move on? It's like, this seems like a lot of work. But over the years, this kind of idea moved forward into like a couple other ideas, even being the wraith or the banshee, actually.
Interesting.
Not the banshee that's, asleep in our bed right now.
Right, of course.
The other banshees. Whereas, the banshee wouldn't look like you or anything like that, but it's the idea of kind of that like harbinger of doom or this omen of something that's going to happen. And really goes along with the fetch in Irish folklore, which is basically like the same thing as a doppelganger, where you see a ghostly apparition that looks like yourself or like another person. And it often, comes with a negative connotation. Yes.
I had forgotten about that.
This idea of doppelgangers has been all over the world. Those were just a few examples, but really it's all over. And it makes sense. I mean, how off-putting would it be to see someone that looks exactly like you?
Right.
That isn't you. I mean, it's going to make you either think you're going crazy or just freak you the fuck out.
Exactly. Right.
It's a very eerie feeling, and it makes sense that people get scared by it. And because it's just so naturally scary and kind of plays on our psyche. Exactly. It's very prevalent in like a lot of horror movies and horror books and things like that.
Right.
But these stories or these instances are not only connected with stories or with legends or with the fictional. There are some real accounts of this happening to some people.
These are freaky too.
These are very freaky. And these are some names that you might recognize.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, in 1603, Queen Elizabeth I walked into her bedroom and saw herself in her bed. However, she was in absolutely terrible condition. Now, not long after that, Queen Elizabeth herself died.
That's interesting.
Yes.
And this is something I'm assuming she herself reported?
She herself, yes, she saw this. And shout out to our Deadly Beauty Trends episode. We talked about her there.
As well. Yeah.
And because she probably died because of that fucked up makeup she was wearing.
Right. I think Elizabeth I has popped up a couple of times.
She
in
has.
episodes.
Now, in 1775, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who was an author and playwright, was riding along a path when he saw his doppelganger riding a horse towards him and going right past him. He thought this was very strange and, of course, was very frightened by this experience. Now, fast forward to 8 years later. He happened to be riding down that same path he was riding on 8 years earlier. However, he was going in the opposite direction he originally was going. Then he realized, oh, this is the exact place I saw my double or my doppelganger. And that's when he realized he was wearing the exact same clothes he saw his doppelganger wearing when they crossed paths 8 years prior.
So let's break that down.
Yes.
Maybe he only assumed this was a doppelganger when
Right.
really it was a time slip of some
Yes, exactly. That's why I wanted to add this in, because usually the idea with doppelgangers is like it's kind of like an omen of some kind or
Yeah.
whatever. It's like or it's a ghostly apparition, whereas this kind of goes along with more of the, like you said, a time slip
Right.
or like, and this was one where it wasn't a omen.
Right.
Or
He
an
didn't
omen.
die shortly after. It's weird
Right.
that he saw himself 8 years later. Yeah, it
Yeah.
almost sounds like a bit of a time slip.
Yes. And isn't it funny that it's like it happened in that spot? Like I wonder if maybe that area just
There's
there
a
was
rift or something.
A rift, yeah, something with the molecules in the air or some
Yeah.
shit. I don't know about science is hard. So yeah, that one's a little bit different.
That's interesting.
Another one. In 1796, Catherine the Great,
Oh,
Empress of Russia, was awoken in her bed by her servants, saying that, quote unquote, she was sitting in the throne room. So Catherine gets up. She's like, what in the goddamn hell is going on? I'm sleeping, first of all. This
Right.
is rude. And she goes to the throne room, and there sitting on her throne is what appears to be her.
So not only did she see it, her servants
saw it.
In fact, came and got her to
Yeah,
tell
because
her.
they were like, what is this? They all see this imposter, they think, sitting on the chair, not the chair, the throne, and she orders this woman to be shot. So muskets start firing, and no bullets pierce this woman. Next thing you know, she disappears.
Wow.
And it was just a few weeks later that Catherine the Great would die of a stroke. So yeah, this one is weird because as far as I know,
And coming to people of power.
but as far as I know, she didn't look in a bad way. Like she didn't.
Oh,
I
so
don't,
this one didn't look sickly like
I don't think so.
Elizabeth did.
Yeah, I mean, it might have. I don't know.
Right.
I don't think this one looked sickly. I think this one just
Interesting.
looked like her. But still, just the seeing yourself at all, I think is supposed to be bad news, unfortunately.
Interesting.
Now we got another one in 1822. Percy Shelley, a.k.a. Mr. Mary Shelley.
Oh, that's right. The husband of the authoress of Frankenstein.
Yes, and he is a poet and author himself.
Yep.
He was visited by his doppelganger one day. He saw him leaving his house, and he followed the doppelganger down to the beach. His doppelganger then gets to the seashore and just points at the sea. And just a few days later, Percy Shelley died in a sailing accident.
Oh, I didn't realize that's how in a sailing accident. Oh, wow.
Yes, yes. And our last historical figure before we get into a kooky spooky story.
Oh, that story is so freaky.
In 1860, Abraham Lincoln,
Oh, my God.
who, by the way, was all the dang over our Ghosts of the White House episode.
That's right. He's obviously, in fact, they say literally every president since Lincoln has bumped into Lincoln,
Yes.
like has seen him.
Yes.
Even if they weren't like believers in that shit.
Right.
Apparently every president since has at least one run-in with Lincoln.
Yeah, he is like the ghost of the White House. Like,
Right.
There's lots of ghosts that people see
Right.
there, but he's the most prominent one. Like,
Yeah.
he's freaking daddy. Now, so in 1860, Abe Lincoln himself looked in the mirror and saw not just one reflection, but two reflections looking back at him.
My God.
One of the reflections was just himself as he was, and the next was a much paler, more ragged, sickly version of himself in the mirror. Abraham Lincoln told his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, aka MTL for short. No one calls her that except me. And he told MTL about that, and she thought that it meant that he would survive his first term, he would be elected to a second term, but he would die during his second term. And gosh darn it if that didn't happen, as we all know.
Very famously.
Very famously. MTL is one of my favorite first ladies. She is also all the dang over our Ghosts of the White House episode.
Yes, she is.
She was very kind of into this kind of thing.
Yes, she was very into the supernatural and whatnot.
I think it's only fitting that she got this premonition correct.
Absolutely.
So there are so many stories of doppelgangers throughout history, and
Right.
also with personal stories that you can find on the internet as well, which are very scary. And I highly recommend you do that. The Reddit thread Glitch in the Matrix has some of them, and you can find them other places to find some personal stories, which are very interesting.
Very scary.
But now I would love to talk about our main character today.
Yes.
This is a story coming out of the mid-1800s in Europe. Our hero today is Miss Emilie Sagee.
This story, it's probably the most famous doppelganger story, but it's also wildly unsettling.
It's so weird.
And there'll be obvious reasons why, but we'll point them out as they come along. Very freaky stuff.
Emilie Sagee was a French woman who started teaching at the age of 16. However, the occurrence we're going to talk about today happened to her when she was, I believe, 32 years old.
So she'd been in the job market for a while.
Yeah, she'd been working. She was working. She was a working lady.
I misunderstood when I first heard the story. I thought she was a student.
No.
I think I must have misheard when I first heard
Right.
the story, but either way, it was still freaky. So now it almost lends even more of a, she's the adult in the situation.
Authority, yes.
Exactly.
So it makes it even, like, weirder, I think.
You're right.
So Emilie Sagee, even though she had been working for a long time, she had worked at 19 different schools in 16 years.
Wow.
Very strange.
Okay.
So when she first applied for a job at an all-girls school in Latvia, there was a little bit of an apprehension about hiring her. However, she had letters of recommendation from previous employers and saying nothing but good things about her, so they decided to give it a shot.
That's interesting. So she never stuck around long, but at the same time, no one was saying anything bad about her.
Exactly.
It's almost like people were wanting to get her off their hands. They just wanted whoever was next to take her.
Or, I mean, I think also it's not like she would have to stay at the school until someone else picked her.
Exactly. That's true.
What that makes me think is that there's something strange going on.
Absolutely.
Because you would think if someone has had to move jobs so many times, it would mean something negative about them.
Right. But you would also assume if there was something negative, it would be she wouldn't have these letters of recommendation.
Exactly. So this school, this all-girls school in Latvia, decided to give her a shot because of all of these letters of recommendation and her reputation as being a good teacher. Now, as soon as she started, she did really well at the school. The students liked her colleagues liked her. She was a very, very good teacher. But it wasn't long until some very strange activity began to happen.
Right.
One day she was teaching her class of 13 students as she was at the front of the room writing on a chalkboard, when all of the sudden, an exact duplicate, a twin it looked like, appeared right next to Emilie Sagee and began copying exactly what Emily was doing. And not copying like a little bit after her, like a second after her or something like that. Like she was doing exactly the same thing as what Emily was doing, as if it was a mirror.
Did she seem to come from Emily? Did she, or was
it just
it like
kind of appeared?
And I wonder if it was like a slow appearance, like she faded into
Right,
appearance, or
right.
if it was just
All
suddenly
of a
you
sudden
blink
she
and
was
she's
there.
there.
Yeah, I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this double of her started mimicking her, and as if she was writing on the chalkboard as well, except she didn't have any chalk in her hand. So nothing was coming up on the chalkboard, but she was doing all of the same motions.
Wow.
Now, of course, this scared the students in the room. However, Emily herself could not see this double. So this is the weird thing that kind of separates her from a lot of other doppelganger
Right.
stories, is that
Yeah.
everyone else could see this double except for her.
I find that the most unsettling.
It's so fucking weird.
Well, it goes against what you would usually, let's just say this falls into a paranormal phenomenon. You assume either everyone's going to see it, or the person is, how many stories have we
Right.
covered, be it haunted houses or whatnot, where the one person can see the person in the room but no one else can.
Right, it's usually the opposite, yeah.
It's like this, that's why this just like defies, imagine like here in Chicago, what if you could get an entire city to play a practical joke on one person? It would be like if you could somehow communicate to the whole city that, hey, on this date, everyone stay home.
Right.
So then it's, Tuesday morning, this person gets up, they're driving to work, and they're like, wow, there's no traffic.
Yes.
Like, how terrified would they
Oh
be
my
for that one
God.
day when they're literally an entire city's it? But imagine everyone around you is saying they're seeing something standing right next to you, and you can't
And you
see.
can't see it, yes. And it looks exactly like you. Oh, it's so weird. You're right. It's like goes against what usually kind of happens in these kinds of cases, where it's like,
Right.
oh, what does that mean? So like we said, Emily could not see herself or could not see her double, but when her double would appear, Emily, the real Emily, would begin to lose a lot of energy and would feel very drained. So almost like this double of her took some of her energy.
Interesting. I almost wonder if it's like a form of astral projection.
Yeah, and that is something that people do think, like maybe it's someone like you from another reality or another dimension that is astral projecting into this dimension. Or maybe it's even her astral projecting without her being aware that she's doing it.
Right.
That does add up. I mean, there's lots of things like that. I mean, that's kind of the whole idea about poltergeist activity, where it's
Yeah.
completely out of your control. It's not like you are a witch doing
Exactly,
a spell
and you-
and like
right.
really purposely trying to make something happen. It's like you just inherently have this ability or this gift, however you want to think of it.
Right.
And you can't really control it. Kind of like wizards before they go to dang Hogwarts.
Exactly,
Kind
right.
of thing. Now, these kinds of things continued to happen throughout the school. There was another time where this might have happened more than once, possibly, but definitely it happened at least once, according to our source here, that at dinner, sometimes she would stand up from a chair, and then as soon as she stood up, her double was still seated in that chair. So it was like she stood up from herself while this double was still sitting in the chair. Once again, completely without her knowledge.
Do you remember actually in Insidious, which is obviously a fiction movie, but do you remember near the end of Insidious where Patrick Wilson has to astral project to go get his son?
Yes.
And there's that cool shot where he doesn't think it's working at first, and so he's like, "This is ridiculous. It's not working." And he stands up.
Yeah.
But then his body is still in the chair.
Exactly. I think it was kind of like that, yeah. Also, it was said that sometimes when she'd be seated at the table eating lunch or eating dinner or something, her double would be standing right behind her, mimicking what she was doing, pretending to eat food and bringing her hands to her face and things like that. But the double didn't have any food and didn't have any silverware. So just standing above her, pretending to do the same motions that the real Emily was doing.
Wow.
That really creeps me out. That's so weird.
Yeah, that's unsettling.
Then it seemed like Emily's double was being seen around the school, nowhere near Emily herself. So now it seemed like maybe Emily's double had not a mind of her own necessarily, like not like she like had tasks of her own that she wanted to do, but it was more so like her double was just being seen elsewhere. It didn't have to be near Emily.
And mimicking her exactly.
Like she was could be doing her own whatever she was doing.
Right.
And the most notorious example of this was one day, Emilie Sagee, she needed to be outside with some of her students tending to their garden.
Right.
So she had a colleague of hers sitting in with the rest of her class during an embroidery lesson. Now, the students could see Emilie Sagee through the window out in the garden doing her thing.
Right.
She looked normal, energetic, tending to the flowers and everything outside. Now, for whatever reason, the colleague who was supervising the children had to leave for some reason and got up and left the room. And as soon as she left the room, the students saw what they thought was Emilie Sagee sitting in the chair at the front of the room where the supervisor was once sitting. And if they couldn't see Emilie Sagee herself, the real Emily, outside tending to the garden, they would have thought that this was the real Emily. She looked that real. They thought that maybe at first, like, she had just snuck in.
And she was just sitting in her chair
Just sitting in her chair, silently staring at the students.
Much like Catherine the Great was just kind of sitting in her throne.
Just sitting there. So all of the students, of course, very frightened by this, until a few of the students got up the courage to go walk up to this double and try to touch her. So the students slowly walk forward and approach the double. They reach their hands out to touch her, and they felt a fabric-like resistance. I've also heard it described almost like they were touching spider webs. While all this was happening, of course, Emilie Sagee, the real Emily out in the garden, seemed to be slower and more exhausted and wasn't able to accomplish as much.
Right.
But not long after the girls felt what this double felt like, the double disappeared. Of course, the students were very, very frightened by this, and when Emilie Sagee was questioned about this, she said that at that exact moment when she was out in the courtyard or in the garden, she was wishing that she was inside with the students teaching embroidery. Like she accidentally projected herself
into the room because that was what she was really wanting to do.
Isn't that so weird?
It's interesting. And I'm interested in this fabric. There's this whole notion of ectoplasm, which I think most people, when you think of ectoplasm, you think of more of like a slime.
Right.
Which ectoplasm can also, I've heard it described almost as fabric-y, almost like cobwebby sometimes.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And you'll see pictures of like old psychics and old mediums and stuff, like old black and white photos of, and you'll see like the ectoplasm coming from them. Have you seen those old photos?
Yes, I have seen them.
It looks like a cloth or smoke almost.
It's very, very eerie. We'll post some of it on our social media, but yeah, it's like these substances that you can physically see and like feel that come from lots of different paranormal activity, like either seances or psychics or ghostly activity. Like, it's very weird. Yeah.
It's almost like that is the material. Like, if you are manifesting something with your mind as it's almost like that's like the material it's sort of weaving together.
Yes.
In a weird way.
Yeah, exactly. I like the way you said that. Yeah, that's like really creepy. So, unfortunately, enrollment at this school began to drop significantly.
Oh boy.
Because these students were so afraid of what was going on and were telling their parents, and the parents were pulling their kids from school. Who knows if the parents like believed what their kids were saying or if they thought the kids were just freaking out, and so they were like, regardless if this is true or not, we need to get our kids out of there. Like, I don't know what exactly the parents thought, but unfortunately, she had to be let go.
Oh boy.
And this is exactly why she was receiving so many letters of recommendation from previous schools, because she was a great teacher and was doing a great job. It was just this double that kept coming up that was completely out of her control. And and I think that's also why people felt so bad for her, was because she couldn't even see what everyone else was talking about.
Right.
I mean, she was fully aware of it, obviously, because people had been telling her about it
Right.
for years and years and years, but like, she doesn't even know what is like going on. If she is doing this herself, she doesn't know that she's doing it herself. And so yeah, it's I'm sure it was very, very frustrating for her.
Absolutely.
Apparently, a former student of hers did go to visit her once Emily left the school. It was said that Emily went to go live with her sister and worked as a tutor or a governess for her sister's children.
Interesting. Okay.
And when her former student went to go visit Emily and spoke with Emily's niece and nephew, they said they were completely aware of, quote, Auntie's twin. And that's kind of where the whereabouts of Emilie Sagee end.
That's interesting. And it also doesn't seem like for Emily this was a foreboding message.
As far as we know, no.
It seems like she saw it a lot. And that's why I wonder if not all of these cases are
the same thing.
Are the same thing.
Totally. That's totally possible.
I wonder if Emilie Sagee is actually some sort of a psychic projection.
Right.
And then what was the other guy who saw it? That was more of like a time slip.
Yes, Goethe.
Goethe. Yeah.
Yes. So, but then whereas with Abraham Lincoln, Catherine the Great, and Elizabeth I, and Percy Shelley, that those all kind of seemed more of like a omen of some kind.
Exactly.
Now, Emilie Sagee's story, of course, a lot of people say that there is no real basis in this story, and it's hearsay, and a lot of it is because it all comes back from one single source, which is the book that we mentioned today, that it was one of our sources. And everything kind of comes from that. And also there was no Emilie Sagee born in the area of France where she was said to be born.
Okay.
However, there was an Octavia Sagee that was born in the correct year and in the correct area where this was. So it's totally possible that maybe she changed her name because she didn't want to be associated with herself, at some point.
Exactly.
Maybe someone else gave her a different name when telling the stories about her and it stuck. I don't know. It's just, I could see that a story like this could not really be documented very well. And especially just back then, things weren't as documented as well at the time, so it's possible that maybe something fell through the cracks and we couldn't see, because there's no employment record of her and all this stuff, but maybe there was no record of her, maybe the school destroyed the records of her because they didn't want to be associated with something like this anymore. I don't know. So kind of like we were saying, this could be so many different things. Is it a glitch in the Matrix? Is it an alternate reality? Is it omens? Is it demons? Is it the Mandela effect? Is it the embodiment of a higher self? Or is it more of just a full-on fucking omen of doom? I don't really know what it is. But it could be lots and lots of different things. However, I want to talk a little bit about how doppelgangers are thought of today and kind of how people think of doppelgangers now and what that is about, why some people have found a real doppelganger of themselves. And now when I'm saying doppelganger, I mean more of the like way people use it now, like a twin stranger or a dead ringer kind of thing. So I thought this was very, very interesting, so I wanted to add it. So the doppelganger effect is actually kind of a side effect of how our brains read faces.
Wow.
Yeah, so there are specific neurons in our brain that work only for face recognition. So they only are firing when we see faces, and as soon as there's we don't see a face anymore, they stop working. Like they're just there for facial recognition. And what these neurons, like how our brain really remembers or analyzes faces, is the geometry of faces rather than specific features. Of course, we remember features and things like that. I'm not saying that features don't matter. But the main thing really is the geometry of our faces, like where our eyes line up, how close is our nose to our mouth, things like that. So our brain connects all of these different geometric aspects of the face, and it creates what's called a facial schema, which is a coded pattern. So this explains how sometimes we can see a face in anything, or in something where there is not a face there. certain houses you look at, it kind of looks like there's a face.
Oh, yeah.
Or like
the Amityville house kind of looks like
kind of
eyes because of those windows.
Exactly, kind of things like that. Or like, you know, those hooks, those like coat hooks on the wall where it's like, it's 2 screws on each side of the hook.
Oh, yeah.
And it kind of looks like it's like those are eyes, and then it's like a nose that kind of comes up. That's where you like hook your coat. So that's why we see faces in places where there are no faces. Because our brains are not a camera. They are pattern recognition software.
Wow.
So the more that you see a specific person, the better you're going to be able to know their face or be able to tell them apart from someone else, because this like pattern recognition software is getting help from your long-term memory.
Right.
So this explains why if you know identical twins really well, like for example, I lived across the street from identical twins growing up.
Right.
And I remember when I first met them, I could not tell them apart.
Right.
But after like a year of them living there, I could, in a second, I could say which one is which.
Right.
Kind of thing. Like, or so that kind of makes sense. Or it's like also maybe why you could recognize your elementary school classmate when you see them like 20 years later.
Right.
Like you're like, I haven't seen you in all this time, but like I know what your face looks like.
Absolutely. That's a good point.
Right. And some people are just better at facial recognition just naturally than other people are. So sometimes when you see like pictures of people online where they're like, oh my gosh, this person found their twin, or like these celebrities look exactly alike.
Right.
And then some people on the internet will comment on it and be like, you guys are so stupid. These people don't look anything alike.
Right.
They're not all the time. Those people aren't just being difficult. I mean, sometimes I think they are just being difficult and trying to be trolls. But some people genuinely are just better at it than other people.
Exactly.
So they can say like, no, that's not right at all.
Exactly.
In the PBS video I watched, they had this woman on there that like she found her double basically on accident via the internet.
Right.
And it was funny because she was saying like how some people said they look exactly alike. However, when she showed the picture of this other woman to her mom was like, I don't see it.
Exactly.
And that's because her mom knows her daughter so well that it's like she can spot the differences so quickly.
Right.
The probability of finding someone that looks exactly like you is about 1 in a trillion, which so it's impossible.
Right, because there's not even a trillion people on the planet.
So there is no one looks exactly like you. Your face it's comparable to like a fingerprint or DNA. However, there are only, so many features in a genetic makeup. So it's very, very common for you to find someone that looks a lot like you.
Yeah.
That is very possible. If you are listening to this episode, there is someone out there right now that looks very, very similar to you.
Right.
However, there is no one out there that looks exactly like you.
My God.
The human brain can really only recognize and like memorize 5,000 faces.
Interesting.
Which is why I think we're all going goddamn crazy with social media, because our brains literally can't handle seeing this many people all the time.
Yeah, that's interesting.
We can't remember and like have a log of all of these people all the time, seeing them. So I just wanted to add that in at the end there, because that part is different. That doesn't really have to do with the Emilie Sagee story. That kind of goes along with more of like our day-to-day feeling of what a doppelganger could be or whatever. But yeah, I just thought that was so fascinating.
Very fascinating stuff.
Yes.
And we have something special for you.
Yes, we do.
This is actually something we recorded years ago, a few years ago.
Oh my gosh, yeah, like a long time ago.
This was for another podcast we were going to do that never came to fruition.
And maybe it'll happen still, who knows?
It is a short story, and it's actually mixed and edited by Gage Hurley, who he wrote like our theme song and our outro music.
So talented.
Yeah. Talented guy. This story is a short story from Reddit. I think it was either Creepypasta, one of those forums.
Yes.
Not really sure who the actual author is, but this was something we recorded a few years ago. We actually shared it with our Patreon members, but we figured kind of fits with this doppelganger story.
Yeah.
So to close us out, please enjoy this scary story featuring the voices of your Creep Street hosts.
I got home from work one day and took off my jacket, exhausted. I slumped into the living room and crashed hard on the couch. After a few minutes of relaxing, I let myself shut my eyes and drift off. But I was suddenly awoken when I heard the sound of a door opening. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and began to hear a cheery voice.
Hello, baby, I'm home.
I could recognize that voice anywhere. It sounded so uplifting and friendly to the ear. It belonged to the beautiful woman that I married only a few months before. I was still lounging on the couch with my eyes shut, but I could still imagine her coming in through the door in her dirty work uniform. She would be so exhausted, but look so beautiful. The sound of her voice made me almost fully wake up. I began to sit up and wipe the sleep from my eyes. I thought it was a little strange for a moment because, well, I don't think I've heard her call me baby like that in the 3 years we've known each other. Was everything all right? Honey, is that you?
Yeah, I just walked in.
I put my feet on the floor and was ready to stand up and go see my beautiful wife, but I heard her voice again before I could get up.
I'm gonna go take a shower real quick.
As she began to finish her sentence, the sound of her voice got further and further away. I assumed that she was walking up the stairs. I realized I wouldn't be able to see her before she got in the shower, so I laid back down on the couch and almost immediately felt relaxed again. As I laid there, I kept thinking about how much more comfortable I would be on the bed in our bedroom upstairs. And I knew I was right, it would. As much as I didn't want to get up off the couch, I knew that it would be much nicer laying under covers with proper pillows under my head. I heard the water turn on upstairs. My wife had just gotten in the shower. Then another thought came to me. I'd be able to see her when she got out of the shower. She'd feel clean, and she'd be fully ready to sit and talk with me about her day. It only took another few seconds before I was fully convinced. I began to sluggishly rise off the couch and make the long trek over to the stairs in front of the hallway. I started to slowly ascend them, but I froze when I heard the front door open behind me. I nervously wheeled around and saw my beautiful wife standing in the doorway. She was dressed in her usual uniform. She aggressively shook the dirt off her shoes. She finally looked up at me and spotted me on the stairs.
Hello, dearest.
I didn't respond. I stared at my wife, my mouth agape. She took off her purse and withdrew her phone. She looked slightly exhausted as she began to tap randomly on the screen of her phone, but she quickly looked back at me once she realized I was standing frozen. Her face became concerned.
Is everything all right?
Just then, the water shut off upstairs. It only took a moment for me to realize that whomever or whatever had come into my house a few minutes before, whatever thing was standing in my bathroom at that moment, whatever it was not my wife. Whatever was in the shower had turned it off upon hearing my real wife come through the door. I quickly turned back around and bolted up the stairs, focusing my attention on the closed bathroom door ahead of me. I threw it open and looked over at the shower. It was wet, and the curtain had obviously been flung open, but no one was inside.
Is everything all right?
I didn't respond. I looked around the bathroom for any trace of the creature that was in there, and I spotted a trail of wet footprints next to the shower. I followed them over to the bathroom window. It was wide open, which allowed for a large gust of wind to waft through the house. I peered out the window and saw deep claw marks in the grass outside. They were inhumanly large, and they led to the forest behind the house.
All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for Doppelgängers.
Doppelgängers. Thank you guys for listening. We had such a blast putting this episode together, and
Yes.
it's a weird, spooky one.
It is. Maureen, thank you for all of that hard work and research. I know,
of course.
we have been very busy lately, so thank you for getting this together.
The world is, at least in the U.S., is starting back up again, and it's a little hectic over here, but in a good way. It's all good things. It's just a lot of things.
Of course, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, family, loved ones, leave a review. You wouldn't believe how much it helps.
It just gives us a little bit of a pep in our dang step.
That's right.
And if you have any doppelganger stories, whether they're spooky or if they're just you ran into someone that looks like you while you were on vacation in fucking Florida.
Right.
I don't know. Tell us. We want to hear about it and we'll share it on the show.
Absolutely. And of course, if once a week is not enough for you, go to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast.
That's right.
As always, I save the best for last.
Dylan, will you just please do it? I've been waiting this whole episode for it.
The names of our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face Via Alungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the notorious Nicholas Barker, the terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the loathsome Johnny Love, and the carnivorous Kevin Bogey.
Wow, those are some fearsome names.
That's right. Well, everybody, take care of yourself, love each other.
Do it.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.
Bye.